So we've been talking about business models, and when we think about business models, we want to consider a few things. First of all, what are the business rules that the business model is going to address? What are the business rules for the processes we want to investigate? So we've got business rules, and then we've got the activities performed in the business process. So we've got models of the activities. Or activity models. We also have models of the structure. So we can think about, say, an organization chart, the structure of the organization. We can think about the way information is structured in a database or in the ERP or in the data warehouse. The structure associated with the business process, and those all have to conform to the business rules in place. You don't want to have a structure of data that allows access to information that people in some parts of the organization shouldn't have access to. A classic example there is payroll. You don't want to have too many people with access to salary information. All right, so then we go up, and based on all this, we've got our business process models. So the business process model incorporates aspects of the activities that take place in the business process and the structure and pieces of information associated with the business process. And all of that has to encompass all the rules associated with the business process. Now, structure models we're going to get into when we start looking into the databases themselves. So we're going to focus going forward on the activity models. For an activity model, there are a variety of types of activity models. And they've been in place since, well before 1920. So we've been looking at using activity models for close to a century now of various types. So what we're doing with an activity model is, what is the sequence of the workflow? What is the sequence of events that take place in the business process? We also want to have some indication of what is the logic, and especially what are the controls in place. What decisions are made during the business process? How do controls influence the way the business process takes place? What steps are performed? And activity models, also we want to have tools. We need tools that can allow us to plan, document, and implement systems. These all provide ways to communicate and discuss the requirements of a system, maybe make changes to business processes and adapt them as the business changes. So some of the different types of activity models. Well, the classic one is a flowchart. Flowcharts have been around forever. Well, I guess close to a century. And basically they provide a step-by-step set of tasks that are performed as part of a business process. Now, flowcharts have a fairly rigid set of rules associated with them, but they're fairly easy to follow. Unfortunately, they can get pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. So flowcharts, I've been on projects where flowcharts took up well over an entire wall of a large conference room in order to describe a system, and to interconnect them all became very difficult to follow. Software development, Dataflow diagrams. Came into being as an enhancement or even a replacement for flowcharts by being able to depict business processes at an even more abstract level than flowcharts. Flowcharts tend to be very step-by-step, very literal. Dataflow diagrams are a little bit more abstract and conceptual in nature. Dataflow diagrams also focus on the actual information flow that takes place from one step to the next. Business process maps, or simply process maps, are another form of documentation. Looks a lot like a flowchart. Typically, flowcharts run from top to bottom, left to right, whereas business process maps will go left to right, are arranged horizontally. And then we've got other types of technical models that are put in place to represent business activities. What an activity model needs to be able to do is describe various aspects of the business process itself. What are the key events? What starts the process? What changes take place? What events can take place that change the flow of a process? Where do we end the process? What are the activities and or tasks that take place during the business process? And since they're linked together in a flow, we also know what sequence they take place in. Now, we talked about some of the key events that change, so it's important to know where the key decision points are. In the business process. What decisions need to be made in the business process that are going to change the flow, make us take one branch of logic versus another branch of logic. And this is how a company's business rules get implemented into the business processes. And then 5, division of labor. Or responsibility. Who does which activity? Which part of the organization is responsible for that activity and is going to be the guardian or the owner of the information associated with that activity? So the common tool in use today is business process modeling. You'll see Bpmn for business process modeling notation. And that is a set of guidelines that has been adopted. There's a worldwide organization called the Object Management Group that has been working on Bpmn since 2004. So this is a new set of notation. It resembles process maps and flowcharts to a great degree, but also incorporates some of the concepts of a Dataflow diagram and even some of the technical notation you see in system development tools in one tool that's to be understood by regular business people and the business analysts that are working with the systems development people. So it's specifically designed for business processes. Designed to be understood by all business people. And like with uniform modeling language, other system development tools, there are tools, software tools, available that support Bpmn, and you can actually do some Bpmn activities even in tools that you already have, like Microsoft Office applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. All have some tools that you can use that include some of the elements of Bpmn. So what are some of the shapes used in Bpmn? All documentation standards have a basic set of shapes, and for Bpmn it's important to start with the key events. So we have 3 events. We've got start, so we can identify where a business process actually begins. Then we have intermediate, and then we have, with the real just thick circle here, end. So start, intermediate, end. These are events that take place. Every business process should have a clearly identifiable start and end event, and may have a number of intermediate events that we want to identify discretely. Another shape, and this is similar to what you would see in a flowchart, is basically a rounded rectangle. I guess that's not a very well drawn rectangle, but hopefully you get the gist. We've got an activity here that's represented in a rounded rectangle. In order to determine what the sequence of events is, we use arrows just like we would in flowcharts or process maps. So the arrows designate what sequence events take place in. Now we also have a tool called a gateway. So this is a building block in Bpmns that allow us to branch out our business process based on certain criteria, and then it also lets us merge different flows back together. Now in general, you're going to see gateways in pairs on BPM diagrams, one where the logic branches out and then another matching one where the logic pulls back together. So let's say we have a process in place where, I'll use my ellipsis here. We have a process that's already taken place, and we have a gateway here where we want to determine, well, what's the payment method? And for a retail store, a convenience store, let's say, they could accept cash or they may process your card. So we're going to have one process that we go through cash payment. And we have another one for a card payment. Once that process has completed, we have another gateway that brings everything together, and then we can continue the business process. So cash payment, card payment, gateway to begin. So a gateway to begin and a gateway to end. Now, if you've worked with flowcharts or seen flowcharts or process maps in the past, you've seen and you may not have even known they were called this, but you've seen what we call pools and swim lanes. And what those do is they help us identify areas of responsibility. For the most part, that would be departments, let's say, in a single company. And a pool would be the entire entity, so the entire company. So they're basically giving us a feel for who is participating in the business process. So let's say I've got a business process here. So there's my pool, but I've got two participants in my organization working on this business process. So lane 1, swim lane 1, and lane 2. So now I've got to start. So the person 2, swim lane 2, has to start the process. But the first activity is performed by the person in swim lane 1. So you can see why they call them swim lanes. The business process is identified in that entire rectangle. If you think of that as a swimming pool, then the people in each row of that business process are basically participating in what we can visualize as a swim lane, or a lane of the swimming pool. So the person is going to go ahead and continue activity 2. Activity 3. And then the process transfers back up to participant 2, who performs activity 4. And that completes the process. So we've got our end. All right, so we've got to start. We've got all the activities in the process. These lanes, lane 1 and lane 2, in the pool, identify which person performs which activity. Now, sometimes a process spans more than just one organization. So in that case, we might have 2 different pools. And let's use a doctor's office type scenario. So we've got a patient, and we've got the doctor's office. Each pool represents a different entity. So the doctor's office is an entity. They're going to have a start. The patient is an entity. They're going to have a start. From the patient's perspective, that start's going to be when they recognize a problem, a health problem. Okay? So they're going to call the physician's office and request an appointment. And now we use these dashed lines when we're communicating between pools to indicate that a message is going back and forth. So the doctor's office has the start, and they're going to receive that request. They will find an appointment time and assign it. And they will convey this back to the patient, which completes the process for the patient and also completes this process, schedule an appointment for the doctor's office. So Bpmn, it's pretty straightforward if you think about it. We've got the swim lanes, we've got the pools for the different entities that are associated with the process. One thing you want to do is think about the best way of doing this type of modeling. And we talked a little bit about it in the previous discussion, how we want to identify the steps and activities that take place, put them in sequence, determine who's responsible for them, and then group them into logical chunks. Well, those are all true of business process modeling. Some of the things that you want to consider: one process at a time. Business is complicated enough, you don't want to try and overreach, so focus on just one business process at a time. You want to make clear what the start and end events are for that business process. And you might need help identifying what those are. So what actually initiates the business process? What indicates that that process is now complete? Next, we want to make sure we include all the essential steps, all the essential elements of the business process, but we don't want to get in too much detail. That can be distracting. And then just think about the flow. The flow of the business process should be clear. There should be a well-defined path as to what takes place during the business process. As you're putting the model together, you want to label especially activities and other items as necessary. Activities, you want to make sure you have some kind of a verb associated with them and probably an object. So what are we doing in this activity? Scheduling an appointment, requesting an appointment, and so forth. And it's important to keep in mind that this is an iterative process. It can be. It's not something that you need to do once from beginning to end. It might be something that you create a draft of and fine-tune that draft as you go back and confirm it with the various participants in the business process. Each iteration, you want to get feedback and improve, make improvements. To the model. And that is business process modeling in a nutshell.